Okay, so this is the branded deck that I've been playing recently. It's been doing very well for me, and I'm planning on bringing this list to the second stage of the Duelist Cup this weekend. So I wanted to make a little video explaining what's going on in this deck list, because it's quite a bit different than my regular branded lists. There's a lot of choices which are probably confusing some of you right now and need explanation, so I'm gonna do that real quick in a little video. Let me start with the most obvious, like, elephant in the room here, which is this card. What the heck is this doing in the branded deck? Why is it Burning Abyss card here? Well, Farfa is in here because of this last effect. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target a monster on the field and banish it until the end phase. Right? This effect here is the only relevant part of Farfa, that and its dark attribute. You don't care about the rest of the effect, so we're not going to bother reading them, you don't need to know what they are. It's only for this effect. And the way that we use this effect is by sending this to the graveyard as material for Lubellion, right? Any dark monster. Either with Branded Fusion or with duplication copying Branded Fusion. And those are both really, really good for a couple of different reasons. First of all, this card triggers when it's sent to the graveyard from anywhere, so that includes the deck. And that means that you can send this from the deck to the graveyard on the opponent's turn, using duplication, copying Branded Fusion, where you're going to a Lubellion. That triggers the Farfa to banish a monster the opponent controls. That's removal, that's disruption, that is, you know, always good. And then the Lubellion resolves and makes you like a Mirror Jade or something. The use there is that this is being used as an extra disruption. There's no other card that you can send that really achieves that. In isolation, you can achieve another disruption by sending a second Albaz, because then your Mirror Jade has the option of sending Rinbrum, and the Rinbrum has a target. But let's say you already have a little bit of setup, and you already have an Albaz floating around in the graveyard anyway, then there is nothing else you can send with the dark material for Lubellion that achieves a second disruption. The only way that you can do that is if you play something like a Farfa. It's actually very similar to how Gimmick Puppet used to be played. The Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. This card would very often be sent with duplication for material for Lubellion, and then you would use the Lubellion to make Sanctifier, and then that would be a one-card Gimmick Puppet lock, providing that you had the Sanctifier material available, right? So some sort of light spellcaster lying around in the banished zone, or on the field, or in the graveyard. And that was really good. We don't really play locks nowadays because Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is banned, and this was by far the best one. The rest of them are kinda slacking. And also the Farfa does something that Gimmick Puppet cards can't, right? Or the Gimmick Puppet lock kinda cards can't do. And that is, it can actually go second quite well, because you can not only send this to the graveyard for material for a duplication copying Branded Fusion, but you can send it for Branded Fusion itself, and this helps going second and breaking a board. In particular, one really, really good use of this card is, let's say you're against Ryzeal and they have a detonator with a bunch of material and a Ryzeal cross. Activating Branded Fusion into that field isn't that good, even if it resolves, even if there's no Ash Blossom, or, like, you know, Impalm to stop your Aliber from searching it in the first place. Assuming that none of that happens and you get to resolve Branded Fusion, it still isn't that great against a Detonator and a Cross, because it doesn't matter how you chain block your Lubellion, Cross can negate it. You know, if you just go send Tragedy, send Albaz, chainlink 1 Lubellion, chainlink 2 Tragedy, the way that Ryzeal Cross works is that it doesn't have to chain to anything. It's not an activated effect, right? So it could just negate your Lubellion on resolution. It can let the Tragedy resolve, and then when it's time for Lubellion to resolve, the Ryzeal Cross can just negate it. And that's not really very good, because that basically means that your Lubellion is just set on the board negated as if it was impugned, and the one search for Aliber there or Quem doesn't really do too much. You can obviously normal summon it and get like Branded in White and keep playing, but assuming that there's other things on the Ryzeal end board, it's not an ideal way to play. Farfa, however, solves this issue quite well, because instead of sending Tragedy as material for Lubellion, what you can do is send Farfa, And then what happens is you're going to go Chainlink 1 Rebellion and Chainlink 2 Farfa, target the opponent's detonator. And the way that Ryzeal Cross works is that it of course needs to detach from a Ryzeal XC monster. So if there is no material on a Ryzeal XC monster, because you've banished the detonator, then they're not going to be able to negate Rebellion on resolution. They're going to have to negate the Farfa to keep the detonator on the board. If they choose not to, and the detonator gets banished, then they're not going to be able to negate Rebellion because the detonator is gone, right? It doesn't work if they have a duo drive on the board that has a material still, or a couple of materials still. That is still an issue that you have to deal with. But if that isn't the case, then they have to commit to negating the Farfa, right? Otherwise, they're going to lose their detonator. And even if they don't, even if they do have the duo drive, you're still outing the detonator, which is still, you know, quite valuable. So, going second with Farfa, actually pretty good too. Another card that Farfa outs is Baguska. Similar to Detonator, you can just out a Baguska if it's on the opponent's board, if they ever make it during their own turn, because maybe you've disrupted them, and they don't have a lot of gas left, so they just go for a Baguska. You can out it very easily using a set duplication, sending Farfa, or follow-up branded fusion, sending Farfa. Right, this card just so easily outs Baguska, same as Detonator, and that's really, really effective too, because that's also very common in Ryzeal, so having an option to out Baguska very easily is very, very appreciated. One thing about Farfa that you might be thinking is that maybe it's a really bad draw. It's not a really bad draw, because, again, this can be sent to the graveyard from absolutely anywhere, and it will still trigger, except the Banish Stone, I guess. It will still trigger. So you can discard it for Rebellion all the same. If you draw it and then use duplication on the opponent's turn, you can still send Farfa, technically, right? Just indirectly. You're going to send like a Tragedy or a second Albaz, and then you're just going to discard the Farfa. And it's going to be functionally the same thing. It's still going to be an extra piece of removal. Technically, this card is also a High Spirits target, because you do play Quirites and Masquerade. We're only playing the one branded in High Spirits, and obviously there's only one Farfa, so it's not going to come up very often. But theoretically, you could go second with High Spirits and Farfa, and just immediately have like a removal spell, right? Activate High Spirits, send Farfa, force something on the field. It's not the worst, it's not very good, but it's not the worst. And like I said, just the fact that every card in branded discards, Opening, Albaz, Super Poly, Rebellion, like everything discards, so having a Farfa in your hand is not the end of the world by any means. So yeah, Farfa has impressed me a lot. I thought that this would be quite gimmicky at first. I copied this from Yuki, one of the branded players at Worlds. I saw this, I thought it was quite gimmicky, but I tried to test it out, and it turned out this was actually insane. It turned out this was not gimmicky, this was not, you know, it's not something like Gizmek Uka, which I frequently play every now and again, and it's sort of like a high-rolly gimmick. The Farfa actually turned out to be incredibly solid. I actually can't imagine wanting to play Branded at all in the upcoming Duelist Cup if it wasn't for Farfa. If it wasn't for the existence of Farfa and how well this matches up against Ryzeal, I would not be interested in playing Branded at all, I think. So you could argue that this card single-handedly increases Branded's tier by like an entire tier. So if you are thinking about playing any sort of branded list right now, it doesn't have to look like mine, but I do think that you should at least be including a Farfa and perhaps 3 duplication in any branded list right now, just because this is incredibly effective. It's impressed me time and time again, and it just continues to be the best decision I ever made for branded. At least in the current format. So yeah, that's it for Farfa. Let's talk about the rest of the deck. The next thing that might stand out to you is that it's a very small deck. It's 45 cards instead of 60. And typically I usually sing the praises of 60 cards over closer to 40. The main reason being that grass is really good in Branded. This is an incredible board breaker. It's also a good backup play going first. If you draw this, it's just, you know, your hand is sick. So I typically like 60 cards. You also get to fit in all of the potential bricky cards, like Golden Sword Soul, for example, and perhaps a second Retribution, maybe a second Makuria, maybe a second Quam. You get to play a lot of bricks in 60 cards, and it's generally quite nice. The reason I'm not playing 60 cards in this build is because this deck is not really trying to play generic branded the way that I normally play it. This list is sort of relying on drawing its non-engine, which is not something that you really do in branded ever. Normally you just play branded with engine, but I don't really feel like that's acceptable in the second stage of the Duelist Cup in the current format. Malice and Ryzeal are just the better decks by far. So I really want to lean into the fact that branded has a good Ryzeal matchup. And that's why all of my non-engine choices look like this. We have Evenly Matched, we have Super Poly, we have Nibiru, and I'm also going to talk about Duplication. This is not really a non-engine card, but I'm going to group it in here because it's the same logic. The deck is small because I want to hard draw these cards more often. I want to see Evenly Matched when I go second. I want to see Super Poly whether I go first or second. I want to draw Nibiru whether I go first or second. And I want to see Duplication whether I go first or second. The reason I want to see all of these cards is because they are all really, really good against Ryzeal. The Duplication, we've already sort of talked about. Everything about why this card is good is the Farfa, the way that it can set up Disruption and out Baguska and out Detonator, things like that. This card is good to hard draw even going second because of Farfa. Ryzeal is not a deck that's going to instantly kill you with its board and instantly kill you with its follow-up. Ryzeal actually needs to play competently on turn 3. It kind of has a game to play a lot of the time, especially versus branded, even if it goes first and sets up a full board. So typically what you can do against Ryzeal is play into the board a bit, you know, waste some detonator material, force some non-engine, and then if you set Duplication and pass, you are far from losing that game. Even if you fail to out the board, the opponent draws return, they draw another card with cross. Their follow-up is not so crazy that they're going to play through one Duplication. The way that the game usually works out is that this Duplication is actually more than enough to keep you alive another turn. Ryzeal is not the best deck at OTKing, and what you can do with Duplication is obviously send a Farfa, banish an important card, make a Mirror Jade, which is hard for Ryzeal to out. You can send Rinbrum, you can summon Albaz. You're going to have an Albaz most likely because you have played a bit on turn 2, you're not just setting a blind Duplication. You do have some setup, right, presumably? So, given all of that stuff, you can generally get to like a Quiritus to save you, a Mirror Jade to save you, Rinbrum Fuse to save you, and you typically stop them from killing you, and then you get to play a grind game, which you're actually favored in because you have a good matchup engine for engine. So even going second, drawing Duplication against Ryzeal is pretty damn good. And of course it's crazy going first. It's always crazy to draw this going first. Not just Duplication though, the other non-engine we have Evenly Matched. This is the single best non-engine card against Ryzeal. You go second, you drop this, you pretty much always win the game. Most of the time, they're gonna have to keep Detonator. Nothing else really makes any sense. Maybe Baguska, if they have that on their board. But what they're not gonna keep most of the time is a set Imperm or a Ryzeal Cross. So at the point where you evenly matched them, something like a Alaba should just win the game by itself, right? They would have to have exactly Ash Blossom, and you would have to have a weak hand that can't play through that, for them to still win from that position, right? Banishing their Ryzeal Cross means that their grind game, which is already worse than yours, just sort of gets cut off, right? And they have very limited resources. They only have 2 of each extra deck card. They've already used 1 of each. They don't have access to, you know, infinite looping with the Ryzeal Cross, so you're probably going to easily win a grind game if you get to evenly match banish their cross. Same for all of their back row, their Plasma Hole, maybe plug-in. All of those cards would be set if they had them, and just getting rid of all of those resources is insane. Evenly matched is just... I've used the phrase lambs to the slaughter, because that's really how it felt when I started playing this during one of my practice Duelist Cups on the rated ladder. Every one of my opponents with Ryzeal, they would just go first, they would combo into Oblivion, do the normal board, and I would draw evenly matched, I would evenly match them, and the game would be so easy to win from there on out. This card is crazy against Ryzeal. And that's why the deck is smaller, because I want to draw this card. A hand where I draw this card is a lot better than a hand where I don't draw this card, if I'm going second. Another non-engine is Super Poly. This is just Super Poly, like it goes without saying how good this is in Branded. It's not the craziest against Ryzeal, but it's more than enough. It's not like you can Super Poly their board away, because typically they don't end on a Super Polyable board. Occasionally they will end on like Star Liege plus Detonator, which can be fused into Mud Dragon, but it's not actually that common, and I'm not playing Mud Dragon for space reasons. I don't think that you need to Super Poly a board like that. The reason Super Poly is good against Ryzeal is simply because you're going to summon an Albaz or an Alibur and then hit them with the Super Poly. Right, Ryzeal is a deck that relies on its non-engine a lot of the time, especially in a matchup like Branded. So if you go normal summon Alibur and then you go activate Impalm, Super Poly is such a crazy blowout because you're going to remove the Alibur, dodge the Impalm, but you're also going to fuse away the Detonator. And that means that on resolution, they might not be able to negate your Alibur with Cross, because they might not have any other Ryzeal on the board. So that's really crazy when that happens. And of course, going first Super Poly is just the craziest card ever. Like you get to make Garura against Ryzeal. You can also make Coritus and Masquerade. Or if you get Albaz on the board, you can make like Mirror Jade and stuff. So Super Poly is, as always, crazy, and I want to draw it. This is not one of those cards where it's like hit and miss, or it's not one of those formats, sorry, where it's like take it or leave it. Super Poly is really good. Every hand that has Super Poly in it is better than a hand that doesn't have Super Poly in it, most of the time. And then the last non-engine card, which is probably the strangest one, given that we're talking about Ryzeal a lot, is Nibiru. Because Nibiru is typically not good against Ryzeal. You don't think of Nibiru when you think of cards that are good against Ryzeal. It's not even good against Malice either. So why the hell are we playing Nibiru? Typically Nibiru is like paired with other hand traps to make it really strong, and we don't have other hand traps. So why are we playing Nibiru in this list? Well, it turns out that if you actually play Ryzeal versus Branded, or Branded versus Ryzeal, and you test the matchup, Nibiru is crazy against Ryzeal. It just happens to be that in this matchup, because of the way the engines interact, Nibiru is insane. If you go first and you use Nibiru, they have to negate it, right? The thing about Ryzeal is that they always technically play into Nibiru. They're always going to summon 5 times. They're just going to have the negate available, so it doesn't actually work. But what you may have noticed about a lot of the discussion what we talked about with Farfa and Branded Fusion and Evenly Matched and stuff like that, is that even the Super Poly plus the Alibur interaction, all of those interactions are made weaker if the opponent has a Duo Drive on the board with a material, which is a pretty common board, right? Like they're gonna go Duo Drive usually attaches with its effect. Most of the time, they're going to go for this line, where you attach the third material with Duo Drive. That way, if Detonator gets removed immediately, they still have a Duo Drive material, which means they still have a cross negate available. But if you drew Nibiru, you essentially deplete that option. So suddenly your Farfa gets way stronger, your Super Poly gets way stronger, everything gets way stronger, because they don't have that one material. And then because the way cross works, it doesn't destroy, it just negates, you're going to keep this Nibiru in the hand. And remember how I said that typically the way that the matchup goes is that you play into the Ryzeal board a bit, then you set like a dupe, you still have a little bit of setup, and Ryzeal is forced to really play the game on turn 3. It's not trivial to just win the game instantly. Having a Nibiru in that situation is incredibly oppressive against the Ryzeal opponent, because yes, they have cross negate available, but you have Branded engine playing, right? You can force cross with things like Mirror Jade or Albaz, and then you can hit them with the Nibiru. it's already difficult for them to OTK through stuff like Quiritus, you know, Rinbrum Revive, Mirror Jade. It's already difficult for them to OTK through this stuff. If you then have a Nibiru on top of it, it can be incredibly reliable. You can feel extremely safe with this Nibiru. It can be the same Nibiru that was used turn 1 to deplete a cross negate, just to get rid of a material. They can know about that Nibiru, of course, and it's still really oppressive, because there's no way they can afford to special summon less than 5 times, and your engine is threatening them, forcing the cross negate, and the Nibiru is going to be the deal sealer, usually. At that point, they definitely don't kill you after Nibiru, and then you just commence grind game, and you outgrind Ryzeal, so... that's why Nibiru is actually really good against Ryzeal. And if you go first, it's sort of the exact same story, just skipped ahead by a chapter. You just set up a board, backed up by Nibiru, and then no matter what goes wrong, you can probably force a cross negate, interact with it, and bait it, and then drop Nibiru, and then you should just be good to go, right? On the follow-up, you should be good to go. So that's why Nibiru is actually really good against Ryzeal, as counterintuitive as it sounds. So yeah, we're playing 45 cards because we want to see Nibiru, we want to see Super Poly, we want to see Evenly Matched, and we want to see Fusion Duplication. It's also quite important to hard draw Branded Fusion more often now than it used to be, just because there is more Baguskas and there is more, you know, Ryzeal Cross, so having the option of, you know, hard drawing the Branded Fusion, which outs Baguska and gets around Cross using the Farfa, whereas normal summon Alibur to search for Branded Fusion because you didn't draw it, that does not get around Baguska. This gets negated by Baguska, and it also can be negated by Cross. So that's another slight difference that makes it slightly more incentivized to play a smaller deck list. But it's mainly because you want to draw these cards, the Dupe, the Evenly, the Nib, and the Super Poly. And I guess you can count the Branded Fusion in that list as well. Whereas in previous formats, in other generic formats, it's not always mattered as much for Branded that you do draw a specific non-engine. Whereas I think it matters a lot in this format, because you're trying to counter Ryzeal right now, and this is the best way to do it. Another thing that might stand out about this deck list is the D-Barrier. Why on earth am I playing this D-Barrier? Is it because it's a Royal Rare? Not quite. Not quite. I'm playing it because, again, we're trying to beat Ryzeal, and this is a Thrust target. Thrust can set Dimensional Barrier quite easily, and the reason why you might do that is because you're playing triple duplication, which means there's a very reasonable chance that if you go first, and you draw Thrust, you also draw a duplication anyway. So the Thrust is kind of pointless, especially because we're not even playing Banishment, which was previously the secondary option for Thrust. But since we're not playing Banishment, Thrust doesn't even have like another good trap to set. You're not going to set Evenly, that's a terrible play. You're not going to set Branded Sword, that's a terrible play. And you can't set Retribution because it's a counter trap. Setting a spell doesn't really do anything. You could set a second duplication, that's probably the best thing. But it is a hard once per turn. Or you can just set follow-up. It's kind of all bad. So I wanted to play another target. And that's the D-Barrier. You know, if we're trying to counter Ryzeal, what better card to play than D-Barrier? So if you go first, and you draw duplication, and your opponent max sees you, you can still set D-Barrier. And if it turns out to not be Ryzeal, and they don't lose the D-Barrier, then so be it. You've still gone first, you've still set duplication, you should still have a fair shot at winning. Gem Knight is a very popular deck right now, and that deck hard loses to D-Barrier, so there is more than one good matchup for this card. It is just very unfortunate that if you do set the D-Barrier blind, and your opponent is on Malice, it's not going to do anything. This card doesn't work against Malice, which is unfortunate. Against Ryzeal though, it's crazy. And even going second, this is sort of the main justification for why I like this card. Even going second, this card is good against Ryzeal. Like I said a couple times already, the way that this matchup goes is that on turn 3, Ryzeal still has to play the game, a lot. So they go first, they set up a board, you interact with it, you pass turn, you have a little bit of setup. Ryzeal is not winning the game instantly, they have a lot of game to play, and if you have a D-Barrier in that position, you're gonna flip the scale a lot, right? You're gonna basically say you can't do anything this turn, I get a free turn, and that's usually all you need to win. That's really good. So going second, D-Berry is still a good card to draw, or search or set with the thrust. And then the last few choices, which I'll go over very briefly, are just some of the ratios which might look a little weird, like the fact that there's 1 High Spirits, 1 Shrouded, 2 Saronir, 2 Opening. What's going on with these ratios? Well, the list wants to be quite small. We've already emphasized that I want to be drawing certain cards more often, which is why the list is small. You can't get it to exactly 40 cards because branded is just impossible at 40 cards. Literally every single card is mandatory. We could take out the thrust package and the dimensional barrier, that would still be over 40. It's pretty impossible to get it that low. But this is sort of as low as you can get because you don't really want to play any less than 2 Saronir because I want the option of using 1 on my turn and then 1 on the opponent's turn. You have to play all of the bricks, the Tragedy, the Kit, the Mercuria, 1 Retribution, at least 1 Albion target, which we're going for branded in red. And you have to play at least 1 High Spirits because there are a lot of times where you want to search for High Spirits. The reason why I don't think High Spirits is good as a 3-of in this list is because we don't have a lot of targets to discard. Alibur is not a target, Nibiru is not a target, and you'll notice the amount of dragons that we have is relatively low. We're playing 1 Lubellion, 1 Albion, and only 2 Saronir. This is again just to keep the list relatively small. You can get away with 1 Shrouded, you can get away with 1 Lubellion, and you can get away with 2 Saronir, so that's what we're doing. The reason why there's multiple opening, even though I usually only play 1 opening, because I think that this card, even in 60 cards, is not particularly good. It's kind of the weakest starter. It requires a discard, it locks you out of Verte. It's not the best starter, it doesn't extend past Imperm on Alibur. But I'm still playing 2 in this list, because without the High Spirits being a 3-of, without multiple Shrouded, you actually can brick quite a lot. And I did want to have a little bit of extra consistency by making the opening a 2-of. Just because, you know, let's say we played just 1. How many starters do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then sometimes High Spirits is a starter as well. 10/11 starters in a deck that is over 40 cards is quite suspicious. So I wanted to just increase it a little bit to, 2 opening. It's still not a lot of starters, but it's getting there, right? Especially when you consider the non-1 card starters like Quem, Cartesia, and like the Lubellion. Like you can do 2 card combos. Then we start to get into the realm that's acceptable. So I'm playing 2 just because I wanted a little bit of extra consistency. Another thing about opening though in this format is that it is actually good against Ryzeal. I know I'm talking about Ryzeal again. It's good against Ryzeal. If a fusion monster would be destroyed, you can banish it to protect. What does Detonator do? It destroys. This card is actually very useful, particularly for preventing OTKs. Sometimes when you try to interact with Ryzeal, because you have to, they will chain Detonator and then pop your monsters, and that would be setting up for them attacking for game easier. And opening is going to protect you from getting cheesy lethaled like that. So opening is actually a little bit better in the current environment, but it's still a pretty bad card, and I'm mainly only playing the second one because I want the consistency. And then quickly looking at the extra deck, the one choice in here that might look a little out of place is this guy, Dragostapelia. We haven't played this guy in a while. Welcome back, Dragostapelia. Why are we playing this card? Well, would you believe it if I said it's because it's very good against Ryzeal? So, against Ryzeal specifically, negating an effect and then making it level 1 is effectively negate and destroy, because they can't overlay with a level 1 Ryzeal. So when they normal summon Ice or special summon X'd, and you target Dragostapelia, target it with Dragostapelia, you essentially negate and destroy it, which is very valuable. This sort of plays with the 1 High Spirit very often. This is sort of a standard line. We saw Yuki do this a lot at the World Championship. Often you will, if you know you're against Ryzeal, or you're like going second against Ryzeal or something of that sort, you can set up a Dragostapelia quite easily. What you can do is have the Quem plus Cartesia plus Mirajade setup, where you banish the opponent's monster with Mirajade, then you go you go Cartesia, fuse away the Mirajade plus any dark monster into the Dragostapelia, and then Quem revives your Mirajade. Dragostapelia is like a further negate and destroy essentially against Ryzeal, and the Mirajade is reset, so it's a second banish, which is a lot of disruption. And the way that you normally get to that board is by utilizing the 1 searchable High Spirits. Often you're going to go Albion, search for the 1 High Spirits, and then do this play. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't feel the need to play a second Albion target, because I want to go for this end board more often than not, where we search for High Spirits. I want to sort of go out of my way to do that. And then we're playing Coridas. This is sort of the last thing I'll mention, because this is sort of the same as it is against a Voiceless Voice. Any sort of mid-rangey deck like Ryzeal or Voiceless that sort of struggles to OTK, Blue Eyes, Coridas is just crazy, because Coridas basically buys you a ton. It's so good. If you use this, everything becomes 0, and if they chain Detonator to pop it, it triggers and summons another card, forcing another material from the Detonator if they want to pop like Albaz, for example. So Coridas is just really, really good, and you get it for free, obviously, with Grand Granola. Plus, it's also a super poly target sometimes. So I really, really value playing the Coridas. So yeah, that's pretty much all the choices. Feel free to ask in the comments if there's anything I didn't really mention. But the rest of it looks fairly standard and self-explanatory. Oh, I guess the last thing I'll say is why we're not playing Deployment. You can sort of figure out by now that the cut on Deployment is simply a case of trying to keep the deck small. It is also because there's a lot of cards in the deck that are not monsters. Super Poly, Evenly, Triple Dupe. These are not monsters, so if you happen to draw a handful of those, plus Deployment, this is not really a combo, right? You kind of need to pair this with monsters for Cartesia to work, right? So, without so many monsters, Deployment is a little bit worse, which is why it was the card that I decided to cut in order to make the deck small, or one of the cards I should say, that I decided to cut to keep the deck smaller. So yeah, that's it. The whole point of this deck list is to beat Ryzeal. I am well aware that Malice exists. Malice is a deck that is impossible to beat going second. The win condition against Malice with this list is to simply win the coin flip. That's why I'm not preparing for it. That's why there's no Lancia in the deck. That's why there's no Chaos Hunter in the deck. It's why there's no Fua or Maxi, because I don't really even care about trying to beat Malice going second, because I'm never going to do it. Realistically, I am never going to do it. And if I do build my deck list with some Malice hate, the deck list becomes worse at beating Ryzeal. And the objective of this deck is to beat Ryzeal, so I'm pretty much saving it for if the Duelist Cup Stage 2 meta shifts in a way where it ends up being a hell of a lot of Ryzeal and not a lot of Malice by comparison, then I can bust out the Anti-Ryzeal branded list and start cooking people, right? That's the plan with this deck list. So, to conclude, this list is really good against Ryzeal. It's bad against Malice, but every branded list is bad against Malice. If you go first with this list, it's still branded, so you're sort of fine against anything going first, providing you don't break. And if you go second, you farm Ryzeal. You absolutely farm Ryzeal using Evenly, Super Poly, Duplication. You farm Ryzeal very easily. You also have a nice matchup against Gem Knight. Gem Knight's going to let you go first, so you can very easily set up a lot of stuff. If you get to set that D barrier, it's going to be crazy. You can go out of your way to set the D barrier, even over Duplication against Gem Knight, because if they sent you first, you know the matchup, right? And even if it happens to be Tenpai, you're still happy about a D barrier, right? Because this still beats Tempai. So overall, that's the plan for this deck list. It's not going to be my main list. Like I said, if the format is just a lot of Malice, then I'm going to play Malice. I'm only going to bust this out if there is an overwhelming amount of Ryzeal. So that's the current way that I'm playing Branded right now, since there is a lot of Ryzeal. So yeah, that should be about everything. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll try and answer. So yeah, thanks for watching.